And so now it is my pleasure to introduce Joe Yelda, Todd Mandeville, and Ellen Mandeville. Longtime ham radio operator and instructor Joe Yelda is also well known in our valley as the owner of Rocky Mountain Appliance for 42 years. He has taught and certified over 300 individuals in more than 35 years as an operator and enjoys chatting with people all over the world. Todd owns Ketchum, sorry, I should have my reading glasses on. Todd owns Ketchum Computers and is an in-demand computer consultant for many businesses, including the city of Haley. And he always does it with a smile, woohoo! Which is not easy to do sometimes. Ellen is a writer and active in education. She's served as a Blaine County School District trustee. Tonight, they will be sharing their ham radio experiences, including a short slideshow of their sailing trip from Mexico to New Zealand with a ham radio as their only form of communication. So please join me in welcoming all three of our tonight's presenters.
Ready? Yep. Okay. See, am I okay with the mic? Okay. So how did this ham radio interest get started here in the valley? So all of you remember Castle Rock? Okay. The fellow that was head of 911 dispatch was a fellow by the name of Bob Greenlaw. He's no longer here. And after Castle Rock, I was at by the way, I'm on the local emergency planning committee for Blaine County. So the next meeting, he comes up to me and says, "We need to talk." He said, "The fire came up the backside of Baldy, came within 10 feet of wiping out all of Blaine County communications." He said, "I know the ham radio guys had a repeater in the new building. I knew the guy, his name was Joe. I knew there were 12 ham radio operators in the valley. I didn't know how to reach them. We have to correct that." So we started teaching ham radio classes. And I think, Tim, you were in the first class, weren't you? Yeah. At the public safety building. So there's 15, everybody passed, and then it just kept on growing. And then there was a tragic backcountry ski accident where a lady was killed and her partner had a broken leg, and it was a rescue. And there were 2 ham radio operators there, and they had the only communication. And then all of Blaine County Search and Rescue, Ketchum Fire, Sun Valley Fire, they all wanted to know about it. So class after class. That's how it started. And it just keeps on going. So we have a couple of videos that we want to show you. Yeah, the first, let me talk about the first one. 2005, Hurricane Katrina. We've all heard about it. And a lot of people don't realize that for 100 square miles, for 3 weeks, there was no communication except ham radio. And this video will tell how ham radio operators did that. And then after that, we'll have another really short video about Hurricane Helene and what ham radio operators are doing in North Carolina. So, Todd?
communication was gone. Cell phones died, nothing worked.
Without the ham radios, we were not able to communicate with our shelters because the phone lines are down. We weren't able to communicate with our other resources like FEMA and MEMA and the Office of Emergency Management.
With no communication whatsoever, with all the systems down, it was very important to Dr. O'Brien.
Communications are extremely fragile, and that tends to be our biggest issue.
As soon as the wind died down just a little, I was up stringing antennas up on the roof. Immediately began to pass emergency traffic, physicians, nurses, any state, bring your license. We need medical supplies, additional vaccines, tetanus.
I was handling HF traffic, emergency traffic, and a lot of it. There were requests for rescue. There were still people trapped in dormitories at some of the universities in New Orleans. I handled a lot of emergency traffic there. Tough. Let's face it, this is the greatest natural disaster we've had in the United States. It's really been an experience for me, and I'm glad to help.
I wound up setting up in a Walmart parking lot. I was receiving traffic over the HF net, a lot of search and rescue, people trapped in attics, people trapped on roofs. There was a woman in labor with serious complications, and she was not going to make it if she didn't get out. They couldn't get a helicopter into that hospital. The helicopter got into Tulane Hospital, and then they had a boat en route to pick her up. And we had her ready to go, and getting in the boat, she got out safely and got into the chopper. That was a real heartwarming experience.
Because I am from New Orleans, this region is a very deep and super important part of who I am. I had to do something. This is my first emergency as a ham radio operator. We put up an antenna at the Red Cross headquarters in Brookhaven, set them up with a radio base, moved down to Gulfport, did some work there, slept in a school. It's better than sitting home and watching it on TV. It's very difficult for me because I'm from New Orleans. I went ahead and got my ticket after 9/11 because I wanted to be of some use. I love the idea of talking on the radio to people on the other side of the planet who you've never seen. And so I did it so that I would be of use. And it's paid off. It's really paid off.
It was such a relief to myself and Dr. Muller and Dr. Bryan to have Mike and all those people out there that helped to communicate with him. It's definitely a definite, warm, heartfelt thank you from me and from our staff.
Without the ham operators, we really don't have a way to communicate. And I'd like to say to the ham operators that helped us with this hurricane that they have been a wonderful asset. They've always had a smile on their face, they work really long, hard hours, and they were there to support us in every way that they could. So I say a heartfelt thank you from the shelter members, from the staff, and also from the Red Cross.
Cell phones, landline telephones, internet, email. Outside of that, what is there? I mean, if it's all down, it's down, and you can't get at the airwaves via the ham operators, and there's no communication. Thanks, guys.
Myself personally and the Red Cross truly, truly, truly offers their complete and wholehearted thanks. I think the American people offer their thanks in that the people in this area are really appreciative of what their efforts are, because from what I understand, you're all doing this as full volunteers, no recompense, you're paying your own way, and that goes really above and beyond anything that I have known before. So a very wonderful, heartfelt thanks, and keep coming back, and if there's anything that we can do for you guys, let us know.
Go ahead.
And with hundreds of people still missing in Western North Carolina and little communication from those hard-hit areas, people here in the Triangle are desperate to find missing loved ones.
Yeah, but for someone, help is actually, help is actually coming from an unexpected source. CBS 17's Maggie Newland is live for us tonight to explain that.
Todd and Angela, we all know that storms can damage cell phone towers like that, knocking out a lot of communications. But even when that happens, a ham radio as small as this can help relay messages when people are looking for loved ones. But we've seen the devastation in western North Carolina, and with that kind of damage, a lot of families are still waiting for word.
I'm just scared for my brother. Just want to hear his voice.
Here in Raleigh, Alyssa Becker is hundreds of miles away from the devastating flooding in western North Carolina. But she's doing everything she can to get in touch with her brother, Jordan Rasbeck. He and his girlfriend, Swan Walker, live in a mobile home in Fletcher, a rural area outside of Asheville.
I have gone through every single resource I can possibly find.
With communication nearly non-existent in some areas since the storm, ham radio operators are stepping in to help where they can.
This is Kilo Mike 4, Tango Charlie. Is there anybody standing by here on the hurricane net frequency?
From his Johnston County home, Van Lee can communicate with people all over the world. He says ham radio can be a lifeline when disaster strikes.
We don't need infrastructure. I mean, we can take a small low power rig and a battery and some wire, and we know how to build an antenna and get on the air.
They can get messages to operators in western North Carolina, relaying names and addresses of people who are missing, and in some cases, getting information back to their worried families.
Give us a name and location. If you've got people on the ground there, if you've got an address, they'll actually go out and check.
But with devastation like this, many families are still waiting for information, desperate for communication.
My prayers go out to everybody affected by this. It's terrifying, and I never in my life thought that I would be in a position where I would be looking for a loved one in such a terrible catastrophe. It's not something anybody wants to ever have to go through.
And the official number, if you're looking for a loved one, is 211. There are also a lot of social media groups that have popped up, some with thousands of people who are sharing information, trying to do anything they can to find their missing loved ones. We're live in Raleigh. Maggie Newland, CBS 17 News.
All right, Maggie, we sure hope they're able to get in touch. Thank you.
5 words you pronounce.
Okay, we ready, Todd? Okay, great. So that's the value of ham radio. But now people are asking, so why is this possible? There's no power. So the nice thing about ham radios, like this one is a high frequency radio. This one, and we're going to demonstrate this one, is a VHF radio. They all work on 12 volts DC. I'm talking about car batteries. So here's a battery that's powering this. This can also power this. And then the battery runs dead. We can do a little solar charger and keep it going. But let's say it's rainy, can't get it charged, need to use the radio. I can use this. And this connects to a car battery. Give me a car battery, I can transmit. And if you notice the ends on this is called a power pole connector, and it actually is getting pretty standard in the communication industry. So what I can do is I can just disconnect this, plug it in, and you can't do this wrong, because you don't want to reverse polarity on 12 volts, okay? That's in my kit. So there are 3 classes of license that you can get. You can get a technician class license, you can get a general class license, and you can get an extra, and that's the highest license. The technician license gives you communications with the VHF radio, and we'll actually demonstrate that for you. But I wanted to talk about the infrastructure that Wood River Amateur Radio has set up in the Wood River Valley. So, okay, if this is Baldy, there's a communications room right at the top of Baldy, just as you get off the lift on the right-hand side. We have a repeater in there, and that repeater rebroadcasts your signal. So what happens is when you use your radio like this, and you key the mic, it transmits on one frequency, and then it rebroadcasts it on another frequency. But now you're broadcasting it at 9,000 feet, and you're using 50 watts of power. So this repeater can go all the way to Twin Falls, and it can go all the way to Baker Creek. But now there's more to it than that. This is the repeater on Galena Summit, and these repeaters are actually what we call linked. That means that you transmit on one repeater, you're simultaneously rebroadcasting on the other repeater. So somebody in Stanley can actually talk to somebody in Twin Falls. So it covers it all north, south, okay? So you're probably asking, well, what about a power outage? That's a big issue. So Baldy has a battery backup of 3 days, and then that building has a emergency generator that should kick in automatically. If not, there's a 3-day period where somebody from Sun Valley Company can go up and restart it. So we should be, and that generator will run for a couple of weeks. So there's the backup for emergency power. Galena has a battery backup between 5 and 7 days. There was a generator up there, but it was old and they put it out of commission. Now there's one more thing about the Galena repeater. It has what's called a phone patch. And literally, if you're accessing the Galena repeater with your radio, and it has a keypad, and you push a code, brings up a telephone line, and you can actually make a phone call. And you can make a 5-minute phone call, okay? The Sawtooth Society actually gave us a grant to put that in. They were very interested in that. So that's the phone patch. So does anybody remember the John Francis story? Does that ring a bell with anybody? Okay. So about 20 years ago, there was a young man that was working at Redfish Lake. He went out for a hike and did not come back. And there's no communications in the Sawtooth Wilderness back then. And the ham radio is the only communication today. So they didn't find him until the next year. And his father wrote a pretty scathing book called The John Francis Story. And I think the Haley Library has it. Oh, you don't know? But I'm pretty sure you can look. Okay. Oh, perfect. So the nice thing about the Galena repeater is if something happens in the Sawtooth Wilderness and there's a lost hiker, there's a downed plane, we have emergency communications. Okay? The nice thing about that repeater, you can be in the backcountry, and this is my backpacking communications. Okay? So here's a ham radio. Okay? Battery backup takes 6 AA batteries. So I can go for a long time if I have spares. This is what we call a roll-up antenna, and put it up in a tree. It's a vertical antenna. It's just like this, and you can reach the Baldy repeater depending on where you are. So let me illustrate that. A number of summers ago, I was up at Imogene Lake in the Sawtooth Wilderness. Does anybody know where that is? It's way back there. I accessed the Galena repeater, and I actually talked to Ellen when she was in Haley. That's how well it works, okay? And if you have a ham license, you can use that. Now, does anybody remember the Ross Fire? Does that ring a bell? Okay. Last year, nearly wiped out Smiley Creek. Okay. Blaine County Sheriff called me And he said, we don't have any communications. Their police 700 system went down. And they had the task of evacuating 200 people from cabins, from Toxaway Loop, campers along the Salmon River. And he says, we have no communication. I said, you can use, it's an emergency, you can use our repeater. And they did, and it worked out fine. But there's a lesson to be learned here. Blaine County Sheriff was prepared. And every one of their patrol cars, the radios that they have programmed in the ham radio frequencies. All it took, just turn the little dial, and they could talk on the ham frequencies. And that's not known in the community. It wasn't in the paper or anything. And Blaine County Sheriff was very happy that we were able to do that. That's the value of ham radio there. So,
Joe, just on that, do you also want to talk about dispatch, that they have radios in dispatch?
oh yeah, that was actually my next. Okay, so Elkhorn Fire has both a high frequency radio and a VHF radio. Blaine County Dispatch has the same thing. So, and they've been used a number of times. We've had a number of snowmobile rescues, backcountry rescues, where the ham radios were using, and a number of times the rescue people on the ground could actually talk to 911 dispatch. So there's a value there. But now, what happens? The infrastructure is totally down. Like there's no repeaters, okay? What do? Well, ham radio operators will then go to a frequency called, and we call it a simplex. Other people call it a car-to-car. This is the frequency, 146.52. Everybody should have that programmed into their radios, okay? So how well does that frequency work? So we have a net, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. On Monday night, where we get 7 o'clock, you can test out your radios. So one Monday night after the net, we had everybody switch their radios to simplex. So with my radio, I'm down at Silver Creek Preserve. I can talk all the way back to Blaine County Dispatch. Elkhorn Fire could talk on the simplex frequency all the way back to 911 dispatch. So it works really well. And there was people in between, and we relayed messages. That's what's going to happen if there's a disaster. I mentioned that I was on the Blaine County Emergency Planning Committee, and there was a program that a geology professor from BYU came and talked about the earthquake potential in Blaine County. I don't know if you knew this, there's actually a fault between Redfish Lake and Pettit Lake. And he said if that fault ruptures, the Wood River Valley is going to feel it big time. Okay? Great presentation. We had everybody really enjoyed. And then he talked about, just a couple more things, like the mirror hanging over your bed. Not a good idea, because if we have an earthquake, it's going to come down on you. And then he talked about earthquake straps on gas water heaters. Anybody heard about that? Okay. So in 1971, the city of Northridge in the San Fernando Valley, they had an earthquake there. The entire city burned to ground. But you know why it burned to ground? Because of the earthquake, every one of the gas water heaters just went over like that. There's enough flame in the gas flex actually broke. There's enough flame left there that ignited it, and now you have a blowtorch inside your house. And the only way to stop that is, of course, turn the gas off. There were over 2,000 fires, and that's why the city got destroyed. That's why it's now plumbing code in Idaho to have an earthquake strap. So earthquake, that's high on emergency planning lists. So the other thing that can happen is we can have a power outage. Is anybody here in Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, 09, 27-hour power outage? Okay, our ham radios were working. I think it was Wood River Fire. Their repeater went down because the battery died. And so I know they were running some ambulance calls on our repeater, which is fine. And then we had a Sun Valley policeman and we had a Ketchum policeman, and they each had their radios with them in their patrol cars, and there was communication all the time. They could tell when neighborhoods were coming back, so we were in communication. But I need to talk about another thing about power outages. Has anybody been following the news this last year about attempted sabotage of power stations? Okay, last year there were 200 incidences in the United States. And so what's happening is there's a group, there's an ideology, and it's comprised of white supremacists that feel that they can bring down society by taking out the power grid, and then whites would rule the government. And this is very real. It's all over the internet, okay? And Idaho Power is very familiar about this. But the problem is, you have all of these substations, power stations, you know, they have fences around them, but they're unguarded. So that's a real possibility. So that's just something to keep in mind. There are some people that, you know, that are preppers and they're prepared. You know, I have a backup generator. I have backup heat. I've got food, I've got water, and so forth. You know, I feel like I'm prepared. There are some people that go to the extreme, but that's just something to keep in mind. I'm going to mention our net. We meet every Monday night at 7 o'clock on the Baldy frequency. And so if you have a radio, you can just check in. If you have questions, you can ask questions. And we do that every Monday night. And it's been pretty effective. With the ham radio, with any of the licenses, you get an FCC license, by the way. There's no music. There's no indecent language. And you can be cited by the FCC, and people have been. And the fines are pretty significant. And this is, ham radio is not CB. There's no, CB talk is not recommended. You know, 10-4, good buddy, you got your ears on, well, you just, you know, that doesn't cut it. There's also no business on the ham radio frequencies. This is not a business channel, okay? So like a guy has a landscaping company and he says, well, I'll just have all my employees go get ham radio licenses, and these are $150. They can all have radios. I can talk. That doesn't work, okay? No business. Okay, let's see. Oh, I almost forgot something. So, this is the VHF radio that's on the Baldy frequency. And could we grab the lights? So now this is going from Twin Falls all the way to Stanley, and everything in between, north to south. And so when I key up the mic, that's the repeater, and I'll WX7XX, looking for a radio check for ham radio class. Anybody copy? Okay, Joy, copied you there. Thanks again. Anybody else? There's a little bit of interference because of the lighting. Anybody else for a radio check? maybe nobody else is there. No, somebody's trying to get in. Radio check, WX7XX. Somebody's trying to get in, but they're not making it. Okay, sorry, unable to copy. Thanks again. WX7XX, we're clear. Earlier this evening, I talked to one of the guys at the Elkhorn Fire Station. So I think I'm going to go ahead and turn this down. Let's see. What do you think, Todd? Do you want to do the...
Do you want us to do our part on the HF frequencies?
Yes. Oh, wait a minute. I forgot one thing. Because I wanted to include this just before you. So this is an HF radio, okay? This radio is 20 watts. This is my personal radio. I have talked all over the country. I've talked Canada, Mexico, Hawaii, Costa Rica, South America, and Europe on this radio. And this is powered by this little battery. Coax is here. It all fits in here. And you heard that ham radio operator in North Carolina talk about a wire antenna. I string this up, I can talk. That's all it takes. Now, a lot of people think, oh, to be a ham radio operator, you have to have a 50-foot tower and a big antenna, and you have to have 1,500 watts. That's not true. There's people, time and time again, have proved this works really well. And Todd and Ellen will now verify that.
My name's Ellen, and Todd and I have lived here in the Valley for about 20 years. Before that, we lived on our sailboat, which is this one right here. We lived on our sailboat for about 8 years. Todd, do you have the thing to control? Yes, please. Okay, so back and forth, thanks. Okay, so this is our sailboat Mandolin. We lived on Mandolin for 8 years. When I met Todd, he told me about this thing called amateur radio, and I'm like, what's that? I had heard of it, didn't really know much about it. He was pretty cute, so I got my license. So if you want to ever call me, I'm Kilo Charlie 7 Uniform X-Ray Sierra. So we had been living on our boat for about 6 years. Does this have a little pointer thing?
It does, but the people online can't
Okay. Okay, so this is in 2000, we sailed from Tijuana, we sailed from Mexico to New Zealand. This is basically our track. Here, you can see here we go. We can do a shadow. It's a lot of water. That was 23 days, dotted through the islands, sailed to New Zealand. Overall, we took 6 months on this little boat. Could not set up that 50-foot antenna Joe talked about. Anyway, like this, Todd set up the radio, I held the mic, pretty much. So that's a little bit of Joe mentioned that we'd have a local amateur radio net on the 2-meter frequency. Todd and I had a radio similar to this, our high frequency. We participated on the crossing. We participated in the Pacific Seafarers net, so all the way across. And because of it, so this one, this is if you look closely, you can see a lot of zeros right there. This is our GPS. That's when we crossed the equator. And because of the net that I mentioned briefly, that I'll mention some more, the operators that we talked to when we checked into the net were mostly on the west coast, the Pacific West Coast of America, also in New Zealand. The day we crossed the equator out in the middle of the ocean, we made a phone call to our parents and said, we crossed the equator today. And we could do that because we had an amateur radio and we could talk to people on shore. So, as I said, there was a lot of water out there, and the reason for the Pacific Seafarers Net is that we would check in each night, we'd give our location, and if there was ever a reason, and lots of boats checked in, lots of boats were part of this. If there was ever a reason for a search for us, that greatly reduced the search area. So there was a lot of benefits to the radio net. But our families knew where we were. But the big one for us, I think, was that we knew if there was a search, God forbid, the search area was just infinitesimal compared to what it could be. We made landfall after 23 days. I was very happy. This is Fatu Hiva in the Marquesas. This is Fatu Hiva where we anchored. This is Todd's up the top. I've never gone up the mast, I'll admit it. This is Todd up the mast. I'm down here in the cockpit. This is the deck of our sailboat. These are our solar panels. And one of these, I think this one, that's our antenna. Our antenna is, Todd can tell you more about that if you want to talk about that. And this is Palmerston. And we show this to people like, oh, paradise. I'm like, no. So we think like Wood River Valley, this is rural. Palmerston is remote. The only way to get there is by boat. There's no landing strip. It's too far from any other land to get there by helicopter. So you can only get there by private boat, freighter. About 50 people live on the island. They're all related to each other, and they don't get along all the time. So anyway, this was one of the places we stopped. This was probably, I would say this was the most remote we were. Todd, the night before we made landfall, had a bad fall in the cockpit. Thank God there was another doctor in the anchorage, and he could check Todd out and say, no, he does not have a hairline fracture in his neck, so he won't accidentally paralyze himself. However, but if worse came to worse, I mean, I could have used amateur radio to communicate with other people elsewhere, saying, my husband's in a neck brace, help me out here. Anyway, so I'm going to hand it over to Todd. That's just a little overview of our trip. And this is also Palmerston, and Todd's going to talk a bit more.
Thank you. So, as Ellen talked about, this island was really remote, and they have communications there. They have a phone, kind of a place where you can go and make phone calls. It's a room. They hand you a mic. You pay something like $7 a minute, and you get to use this antenna, and that's how you talk off of the island. When we're in international waters, meaning 12 miles from shore, we were able to, as Ellen mentioned, make phone calls from the boat. And really what that's about is talking with another radio operator that's on shore somewhere. Typically we would do it after the Pacific Seafarers Net. And the operators on shore would say, if anyone needs a phone patch, let us know. We'll go to another frequency and do that. And then what they would do is they'd connect their radio to their local telephone line, their landline. They would dial a number for you, and then through the radio, then you would be talking on that landline the rest of the way to whoever you were going to make a call. So our parents actually heard from us quite a bit when we were out sailing, But then once we would get within 12 miles of an island, to protect the telecommunications from the island, and where this is amateur, not professional, we're not allowed to make phone calls close into the island within 12 miles. And so we'd kind of go radio silent whenever we're at islands, because we didn't want to go and pay $7 a minute to use the same thing we had out on the boat. Yeah, and then I'll back up just a little bit here. Yeah, as Ellen mentioned, on the sailboat, we strung a separate antenna from the stern quarter of the boat up to the top of the mast. And then we also had a radio and a tuner. It's basically just a larger version of what Joe's got here. And then underneath the boat, we had this sort of copper plate, and that provides the ground plane. And so that helps the radio waves really kind of transmit, just leave the antenna. And it's really quite clear. It works really well. The other thing is we have almost no interference from electrical. Like earlier this evening, we tried to do some radio testing, and the fluorescent lights were really messing with things. Just the electrical grid in town is really rough on these HF frequencies. But when you're 12 miles offshore, there's no interference. It's great. So that's kind of the setup that we had. A couple of other interesting things that we had on the boat. Let me stop just for a second. Joe talked about those 3 different license levels, and the technician license, that's the sort of first license, the easiest license to get. That's going to get you where you can use a handheld, where you can use one of these mobile radios, but that's pretty much line of sight, plus a little bit. But that's why we have repeaters, is we're often line of sight to the top of the mountain, and then if our signal can rebroadcast from there, but it's pretty much what the top of the mountain can see. When you take that next step and get your general license, and then after that, if you want to get your extra license, what that opens up for you is the ability to use these high frequency radios. And the difference with the high frequency radios is that the wavelengths are so long. The wavelengths on these radios are 2 meters. We were often using 20 meter or 40 meter wavelengths on our HF radio. And when a wavelength is that long, the wave will go up and it'll bounce off of the ionosphere and then reflect back to Earth, and then maybe skip off of Earth, and you can have sort of multiple hops, but allows you to talk over the horizon. And so that's really the big benefit of going to that general class license, is it opens up this HF radio, this high frequency, these longer wavelengths where you can talk over the horizon. Interesting story. One evening, Ellen and I had the radio on and just sort of listening to frequencies, and we heard another sailboat talking, clear, perfectly clear, like they were right next to us. And then found out that they were in the Atlantic Ocean, and we were in the Pacific. And then we talked more and figured out that they were in the Azores. And then we started looking at our time differences and figured out that we were exactly 12 hours time difference. So here we are talking to this other boat in the Atlantic Ocean that's pretty much exactly on the other side of the planet, just like they're right next to us. So fun things like that. Nighttime, as you get into this more, you'll learn more, but nighttime, a couple of the ionosphere layers merge together and it becomes a stronger kind of mirror to reflect those waves back. So we know that to talk to that other boat, we were talking around the dark side of the planet, not the light side of the planet. So anyway, that's, yeah, so I just wanted to touch on that. But then once you do get into HF radio, then you can start using some of the different modes of radio. We talked about being able to do phone patches, which is just voice, but then there's also these digital modes that, that you can do as well. And so it's often known as packet radio. You're sending these little packets of data. And so we had a modem on the boat that would go between our laptop and the radio. And if you remember way back in the dial-up days when you used to have a computer and then your modem to connect you to the landline, pretty much the same thing, except that instead of connecting it to the landline, we connected it to our radio. Then we would get the radio on a particular frequency where there was another station, land-based, but connected to the internet. And then with the software, we could type up an email on our laptop, and then it would go through the modem to the radio, to the shore station, and then connect onto the internet, and that email would go out. And then if somebody replied to that, it would kind of follow the reverse path. It would sit there, the reply email would kind of sit on the servers, and then when we connected, it'd be like, oh, hey, and there's a message waiting for you. And so it would traverse across the skywaves into our radio, through our modem, onto our laptop, and then we could see what our family replied to us. So anyway, that was an interesting thing. You can also do packet radio on the VHF radios. There's a lot of different modes. There's ways where you can send pictures, send video, but we found it most useful to be able to send and receive email out on the ocean. So,
Hey, Todd.
yes.
Do you want to mention we could talk to other amateur radio operators at the islands? We just couldn't make phone calls.
Oh yeah. So this is good. Actually, this is a good picture. At the bottom of this picture, this is a stay that holds our mast up, and there's this sort of interesting little fitting right there that's actually a repair. When we got done with our 23-day sail, and then we were, I think, in the not in the Marquesas anymore. I think we were in the Societies. We started doing rigging inspections, and we realized that we had a crack in our rigging. And so we were able to talk with other boats and ended up finding a boat that had just the wire that we needed, and they could have named their price. They wanted a bottle of wine. We're like, we'll get you a bottle of wine. Yeah. And so, not only, were we talking to shore stations, but we could also talk to other boats. So that was pretty useful. And then Ellen mentioned on these, like the Pacific Seafarers Net that we would check into every evening. We would also be able to hear a lot of the other boats checking in. We might not be able to hear the boat, but we could hear the radio operator that was checking them in. And where that was really useful is that not only would you give your position, but you would give your weather, wind speed, barometer rising or falling, sea state, how high the waves were and stuff like that. And with weather facts that we were also able to pull through our radio, we could see when a low pressure system or a front was coming. And that's useful, but then when you can plot other boats and watch that traverse over them and realize that their sea state's going from 2 feet and 14 knots of wind to 7 feet and 35 knots of wind, you have an idea of what's coming towards you. And so that, so being able to talk to other boats, and then we could also just talk to them directly. We could just call them and be like, tell us what, we heard your report on the net, like, tell us really, how are things going? And have those kind of conversations. And this is a fun picture. Some of our anchorages were really, really calm. If you look along the top, you'll see this sort of horizontal line. At the top right is our anchor. So this is how clear the water is. And we just sort of drifted a little ways off the anchor. There's like no wind. Oh, and a stalk of bananas. You have to have provisions. Okay, so we talked about Palmerston. And we saw other boats out there. We don't normally sail this close to other boats out on the ocean, but this was a French boat that we'd been talking with, and they came up and sailed over, and we got to wave hi to each other, so that was fun. Not radio specific, but this tether goes down to a jack line and keeps me clipped into the boat all the time. So if either of us are on deck, we tether in, clip onto a jack line, we can go up and down the length of the boat. And particularly if you're on deck by yourself. If you fall off, that's it. Nobody's coming to find you. And then this is our first sighting of New Zealand. Right in the middle of the photo there is just with the clouds. And New Zealand is Aotearoa, land of the long white cloud. So we thought this was pretty fitting. And it's also really green in New Zealand. They have nice anchorages. So anyway, that's just a little bit of our crossing. Yeah, Ellen mentioned that it was done over 6 months. I think we calculated that we had 54 days of sailing, so almost 2 months of actual sailing, and then the rest of the time we would have been at the islands in between. And yep, New Zealand's amazing. Our daughter was born there, and we've been back here for 20 years, and yeah, it's been good. And that's all the photos that I have. Joe, did you have anything else that you wanted me to talk about with HF radio or?
No, and I think we've covered it.
Okay, and Ellen and I are both happy to answer questions that you have probably at the end about radio and or our crossing. Like we're happy to talk about that. It was in a little bit of a previous life before kids. When we were younger, but it was formative. Okay.
So speaking of sailing, I had this experience about 25 years ago. Couldn't sleep one night, so it was probably 2 or 3 in the morning. Went down to my radio, turned it on, just playing around, and all of a sudden, I heard this signal, and they were calling CQ, which means they're going to call any station. So I answered them, and they were just crystal clear, and I go like, so where are you? And they said, we're 1,000 miles off of Bora Bora. I said, oh, great. And they said, where are you? And I said, I'm just south of Sun Valley, Idaho. And the lady said, my mom lives in Sun Valley. And she said, this is 2 or 3 in the morning. And now this is before we had internet, before we had cell, and they had just the ham radio. And she said, will you call my mom, tell her daughter is okay? So I did that at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that was, I remember that, to this day. So when you get a ham radio license, you're going to get a call sign. So, like my call sign, well, I guess that's not going to write. Try and read. That's my call sign, WX7XX. Ellen calls me Dos Equis. Mr. Dos, yeah, excuse me. Okay, you heard my wife Joy on the radio. So her call sign is, you have any idea what she likes to do? So you can... Snowboard. Okay. So then there is and he's a former police officer. He did not like his call at all. And he decided he was going to change it. And you can change your call sign if you're not happy with it. So his call sign and so you can do anything. There's one of our other guys, his call sign, can you tell what kind of dog he likes? So you'll have a call sign, and that's how you identify. You have to identify every 10 minutes. That's FCC regulations. Let's see. Now, let's talk about the BMT, the Boulder Mountain Tour. Everybody's familiar with that? What happened to Jody? Oh, you're right there. Okay. Jody is the race director for the Boulder Mountain Tour. And we do 2 events where we do communications for. We do the Boulder Mountain Tour, and we do Rebecca's Private Idaho. Now, for the Boulder Mountain Tour, I mean, we could use the repeater, but what we usually do is we use these radios, and we use the directional antenna, and we go in between the aid stations, and it works perfectly. So we provide communications from Galena Lodge all the way to the SNRA. Now, the other one that we do is we do Rebecca's Private Idaho. Is everybody familiar with that? In Copper Basin, and there is no communication in Copper Basin. And we do the same thing. It's a 100-mile, 50-mile gravel bike ride up over Trail Creek and all the way through Copper Basin. And we provide communications for that. So when you get a license and you want to really learn the radio, volunteer for the event, we'll put you with a ham radio operator and we'll teach you the ropes. And actually probably what he'll do, or she will do, is give you the radio and say, okay, you need to get over mic fright and you need to, and you need to relay. So we relay all the information. And we work on the Rebecca's Private Idaho, well, actually also on the Boulder Mountain Tour, we work with the Ketchum Fire Department because they provide the ambulance, emergency communications there. Another thing that we do in June, on the last weekend of the month, we do what's called Field Day, where we actually go out and we camp somewhere. And then we use our radios and test everything and make contacts. So what we've been doing for the last few years, we'll go down and camp at Haysburg Campground. We'll set up wire antennas in the tree. We'll talk all over the world, okay? So that's preparation. So you're not pulling stuff out and like in an emergency and say, oh, where did I put that? We're going to do this, okay? So let's talk about how to get a license, okay? So this class is an introduction to ham radio. And I've taught a lot of these classes. The first class I taught was four classes, but everybody felt that was too long. Then I squeezed it down to 3, and then I tried to squeeze it down to 2 and try to do the testing at the same time, and it was information overload for many, many people. So, but then the pandemic happened, and we couldn't do any more classes. So, but everything has gone online now. You can take the class online, you can test online, but a class like this just gives you some ideas about ham radio. So let's let's do a tour of the website, and then we're going to do we're going to do another website called Ham Radio Prep, where you can actually study. And as far as the test goes, there's usually a pool of about 300 questions. There's 35 questions on your test, and if you get 26 right, you get a license. And these are all published. There's no, what you see on the practice, you're going to see in the actual test.
So can you hear me okay? We're good? So if there's maybe one thing you want to jot down for this evening, if you want to get your license, is the Wood River Amateur Radio Club website, and that's just the initials. It's WRARC.org. And this has got information about the club, about our repeaters, and some of the events that we do. But probably the most useful thing for you is this page called Get Your License. And so if you go to that page, it's got some steps here. First step, let's study. And as Joe said, it's pretty much all gone online. This ham radio prep link is very good. They actually have just a sample class there that you can go and take and see if you like that format. Joe, I think, did you say it's $35 to pass or to get educated and for your tech license?
It's $35 for the class.
And I think they guarantee that you'll pass the test. If you are a book person and prefer not to learn online, you can get a technician class book, read that, and then go take your test. You can also jump up to general class. And then there's also some good study guides online as well. And then as part of ham radio prep, you can take practice tests. And they try to make it easy for you, like the whole question pool is published. And so if you're a good test taker, you can just go and start taking tests until you're passing them, and then go take the real test. Also, this website, we call it QRZ, but QRZ.com, you can go there and take practice tests. And if you are comfortable and feel like you're taking tests and passing them every time, then you can go down and do an online test. And so this link will take you to a website that's kind of a clearinghouse for tests. They will do in-person exams, but they also have listings of remote or online tests. And so if we look out here, so here's today, tomorrow, pretty much any day you want to take a test, you can go and take a test. It's going to cost you some money. I'm guessing
$15.
Yeah, 15, maybe up to 50. Because they're having to provide materials and infrastructure and somebody to kind of monitor or proctor the test. But it's pretty neat that you can go and just take your test, and then soon you'll pass. And then when you do, the FCC will send you in the mail your call sign, but you can also go and do a call sign lookup. And so you can, again, on this QRZ website, you can put your name in here and find out if you have a call sign. And once your call sign's published, you're good to go.
So Todd, why don't you type in Blaine County, Idaho?
Oh. Let's try this.
Oh, you might have to by county.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, by
let's
county.
There you go. Thank you. Oh, need to log in. Yeah, I don't think we can do this without a login. I don't have mine right now. But what would we see here?
You'd see
if this worked.
You'd see every ham radio operator in Blaine County.
And
there's over 300 of them. You can also type in Camas County and Custer County, and you can see everybody that has a ham radio license. And you'd be amazed, and I'm sure you'll know people that already have a license.
And one of the other things that I find interesting is that because of all of the recreational opportunities that we have around here, backcountry skiing, mountain climbing, backpacking, and on, and lack of cell phone coverage, there's a lot of people that are getting their amateur radio licenses to have communications in the backcountry. And so if you looked at a heat map of the United States with licensed amateur radio operators per capita, we would be really, really high. And then the other thing that's interesting is if you did a heat map of licensed female amateur radio operators, it would also be really high compared to the general population of amateur radio operators. And like Joe already mentioned, sheriff, police, fire, search and rescue, Galena backcountry, there's just a lot of amateur radio operators in the valley. So anything else we want to look at here?
Let's go to ham radio prep.
Okay.
This is the website that I really like. I've actually contacted these people, and I actually took the actual class for the technician and the general class, because I said, I'd like to tell people about this, but I want to do this firsthand so I can recommend it. So let's try a free lesson. This will give you a good idea. So,
and do we want to go through the video?
No, let's keep on going down. So this is the nice thing. That's one of the questions. Who regulates ham radio? FCC. We talked about your ham radio license, technician, general, and amateur extra, and then let's keep on going. Call signs, there's an example. Phonetic alphabet. That's one that you need to know. I'll have sheets on Saturday for you. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. The reason why you want to know that is if there's an emergency, a lot of times you're going to have to spell out where you are. So let's say you have an emergency at Farley Creek, which is up in the Sawtooth, but it can sound like Smiley Creek. So you may have to do it phonetically to tell people where you are.
Like Farley Creek, Barley Creek, like a lot of these things, a lot of the letters are really close.
Close. And so here's CQ, we talked about it. So let's go ahead and take the quiz. This is how, okay. So let me let you guys answer this. So what agency regulates, forces the rule? FCC, okay?
Correct.
And then you'll see if it's correct. So here's one, a little tricky. What license classes are there?
Back when Ellen and I got our license, we could, oh, sorry. But that's good. Incorrect, and here's the correct one for today.
Yeah, Todd and Ellen and I have a license. It's called Advanced. It's in between the general and the extra, but it's no longer offered. But we just kept it because they grandfathered it in.
And we had to know Morse code at 13 words a minute. And you don't have to do that anymore. And so they've made it really easy for you. Can I go, do I get it? Oh, I don't get a second try. No. Oh, wow.
And then...
Oh, a normal term.
What's the normal term? 10 years, okay.
Nice.
And so then we talked about phonetic. Courage, yeah.
And CQ. Calling any station.
Calling any stations. That's how the tests will be. You'll have 35 questions. You've got to get 26 right.
Yeah. I think we would have passed.
Yeah, we passed. Okay. Well, now, I'm going to mention something about some of the questions. Some of the questions you will never use. Well, Tim, you took the test, right?
I've taken the test.
Yeah. Long time. But a lot of them, you're not, they're not, you learn it to pass the test. A lot of them you'll never use, okay? Our goal here is to have you get a license. That's the big thing. After you get the license, then it's really the start to learn ham radio. License to learn, yeah, very good. Okay.
Anything else on the website?
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
That gives you an idea.
Joe, on your Monday net, are you talking about Baldy repeater or Baldy talker?
Baldy repeater. We're talking on the Baldy repeater. Yeah, so I think we've, well, let's open it to questions.
If you'll wait just 1 second.
Okay.
Thank you. I know some people may have to leave.
We're getting
So
close.
I just want to encourage you to fill out that survey. Also, a reminder that we're offering the 3-hour ham radio workshop on Saturday. It's currently full, but if you're interested, please sign up on the sheet in the back. If you came in and just automatically signed up on the sheet in the back, you can cross your name off or put in there, you know, I'm interested in the workshop, or just something to let me know why your name is on that list. That would be super helpful. So I think we'll go to questions now. So these guys are going to field the questions. They're going to hear what you say for a question, and then repeat the question for our AV equipment to pick up. So for those of you who need to scoot off, thank you so much for coming tonight. It was really a super talk, so go ahead.
Also, if anybody needs to contact me, if you go to the website, my email address is on the website. And you had a question.
I have 4 questions.
One at a time.
2 for each. Start with the easy one. What kind of boat is it and where is it now?
So it's
the question.
The question is what kind of boat did we live on and where is it now? So the boat is a Cal 34, which means that's a type of boat. It's sort of like saying a Mustang, you know. So it's a Cal 34, 34 feet long, about 10 feet wide. There's maybe about 200 square feet down below of living space, 200 square feet. And it's currently, this is great, it's currently in Fiji. We've never been to Fiji, but our boat's been there for quite a while. We've actually partnered with a marine reach ministry that they have use of the boat and they take care of the boat. So it's currently in Fiji.
And while 200 square feet may not sound like a lot of living space, we have a really big backyard.
The other 2 questions, you were able to customize the call signs, but only with the last 3 alpha characters. What do the first 3 represent?
Oh, that's a good question. So he asked, the question is, the call sign, you can customize the last 3, but what are the first 2? So this identifies, the W identifies United States. It also can be K, N, A. Okay, and the 7 identifies the Pacific Northwest. That includes Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Utah, and Arizona.
I have a question that bounces off of that. What happens if you move? Do you need to have a new call sign? Or is it just kind of like my area code by phone?
You can, that question was, if you move, do you have to change call sign? No, you just keep your call sign. Okay, yeah.
Just to follow on to that, but you can if you want to. And so like if, let's say that you had a 2 call sign from the East Coast and you moved to Idaho and you'd rather have a 7 call sign, you can reapply or get one of these vanity call signs that would have a 7. And when I got my vanity call sign, I wanted a 7, but I could have maybe had some different choices for the last 3 letters if I got a 3 or a 6 or something like that. But I wanted a 7 so that when someone's talking to me, they kind of know where I am.
And finally, with respect to the test, it has, you said 300 questions?
It's a
Pool, 300?
question is,
Here's the question. Whatever the size of that pool is, does that pool change in terms of what are the specifics? Are the rules changing at all, basically, in radio?
okay, so the question is, are the rules changing? So the question pool is about 300 questions. It does change every few years. They update the question pool. But when you look on the website and you start studying, those questions that you're studying there'll be 35 of them exactly on your test.
Okay, this is not necessarily specific to the test, but this is in general. Are there new rules being issued throughout time?
Oh, are there new rules being issued throughout time? There may be from time to time. I mean, 2009, they eliminated Morse code. Big change. Okay?
Yeah, and we're in the 2023 to 2027 question pool and rule set. And yeah, like the other thing, when they dropped Morse code, they've also dropped a few of the license classes, the novice class and the advanced class, and they simplified it. And so that would be some rule changes about what you're allowed to do on certain frequencies.
Chris? Okay, the question is, do you have to take each test in sequence? Yes, you have to get your technician life first, general, and then if you want to go on to extra, that. And we have Dennis in the back row, and he passed his extra, and he did it online, passed his general online. So, yes, but
I want to get like a more, okay, I understand HF, UHF, VHF, I understand AM and FM. What I don't understand is what's the real difference in terms of capabilities between, I think that's a UHF set, right?
VHF.
An FM set, or like walkie-talkie. They're like, I can use it without a license. I can use a walkie-talkie. I can talk to somebody 3 miles away if it's line of sight. How much more capability do you get with a license and a ham radio versus a CV, which is basically the same thing as a walkie-talkie? I believe the CV band is the same as a walkie-talkie band. Is that correct? And are there other bands, like for instance the Ski Patrol has radios? Are those walkie-talkie? Are those CV bands or some other frequency set? Because those guys don't have ham radio operator licenses.
Okay.
They can talk to each other all over the mountain.
So here's the question. So what about the different bands, and what can you transmit on? For example, you'll have family radio, you'll have GMRS, and you have ham radio.
You just say what the acronyms are?
GMRS?
So the FRS is this family radio service, and these are these little Motorola radios that you can go and buy at Home Depot or Costco or whatever and hand them out to your buddies. And I think those were the ones you were saying, talk 3 miles, line of sight, pretty useful. And then GMRS is pretty much that same radio. I can't remember the acronym, but it's basically family radio with a little bit more power. But I think you're still talking about and then the Ski Patrol would be, they're going to have a commercial radio, and so it can be as powerful as these, but they have to have a commercial license and certain frequencies that the FCC has assigned.
But the individual operators
because they're on that frequency and they're employed by that organization. Sorry, the question was why can a ski patroller use a ski patrol radio? And it's because they are part of that organization, and the organization has a commercial license. So they're allowed to hand those radios out to their organization, their employees, say. But one thing between like the Family Talk, I think 1/4 watt, and GMRS maybe a 1 watt radio, whereas the amateur radios like Joe has there, this is a 5 watt radio. So you're going to have a lot more power pushing out, and so longer distances. So with that radio, if you're line of sight, 20 miles maybe, versus 3 miles.
Plus you'll have the repeaters. That's the benefit of the ham. This is for the VHF.
Can you set up temporary repeaters, like for like an RPI? Do you set up temporary repeaters for Copper Basin?
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
Oh, can we set up temporary repeaters? Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually looked at that this year for Rebecca's Private Idaho. There was a neat fire lookout right up from Wild Horse, and would have been an amazing place for a repeater. Covered all of Copper Basin and everything, and it was a full hour on an ATV to get there, and we decided it just wasn't worth it because our just point to point from all the aid stations works well enough that we didn't feel like going to the extra effort of putting a repeater in was necessary. Did that answer your question?
These radios need to be more reliable than what the police and fire are using. Why don't the police and fire use these radios?
Okay, the question is, why don't the police and fire use these radios? First of all, a lot of the Ketchum Fire in a backcountry emergency will actually use their already licensed ham radio operators. The reliability of this radio and how it transmits, I had a former Ketchum fire chief tell me, he said, our repeater system and our radios are much better than what we have. That's from the fire chief. These work really well.
I want the fire department to carry it. The radio out there is terrible.
Okay.
Why can't we have something like this?
Well, because remember, I talked about the fire department is considered a business.
Or commercial.
Commercial, and so that's why you can't have you can't use a ham radio.
They just operate on different frequencies than what we operate on?
Yes.
Sorry, repeat the question.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
the fire department, the question was, does the fire department operate on different frequency than amateur radio? And yes, they do. It's the FCC designates who can use what frequencies. So for amateur radio, it's very clear what frequencies you can use, what frequencies each class can use, and what frequencies they cannot. So like this frequency is different than citizen band radio, is different from fire, is different from police.
I'd also like to just follow on a little bit with that question. We want to be a little bit careful about reliability, because while we've worked really hard to have reliable repeaters and reliable equipment, these radios are not built to the specs that commercial radios are. And so these radios, if they're supposed to be transmitting just on this frequency, there might be a little bit of transmission over here and a little bit over here. And in a commercial environment, that's not okay. They have to be really narrow because there might be somebody right next door. And so I would say that that's probably the main reasons why an organization just can't go and grab some amateur radios and start using them, is that they aren't built to those really tight specs. A police radio, a fire radio, a commercial radio, they're going to be just really dialed in that this is the frequency, it's not going to bleed either way, it's not going to affect other stations. And so while it sounds nice of, hey, we can go buy this $120 radio or this $300 mobile radio, versus the fire station looking at $3,000 radios or $5,000 radios. You can't, like, they're just sort of two separate things. Did that help? Yes.
Now I'm a little confused because on my radio I can get on Gold 1, Gold 2, I can get on BLM, I can get on EMS 1, EMS 2.
I can.
Okay.
His question was, Tim has a ham radio license, and he's got a radio, but he can access all the fire, EMS channels and stuff like that. But he's also on Galena Backcountry Ski Patrol, and his radio's been programmed. I mean, it's actually, it's basically the same radio as this, but it's been modified so it transmits and receives on all those frequencies, okay?
So it's been modified?
It's been modified, yeah, it's been modified. And you don't want to transmit on a frequency that you're not authorized to use. And you've heard that, I'm sure.
Of course.
Yeah, so.
I didn't realize it had been modified.
It has been modified, yes. Probably Dave Lister modified it.
Or Ashton.
So just to clarify, can, like, people like Tim, can they have the same radio as amateur radio operators, and it's just they're programmed differently in different frequencies, and that's what allows them to hear different things on different channels?
Well, let me, so the question here is, can these be used on different frequencies? Okay, but let me clarify that a little bit. So this radio will actually go and cover all the fire frequencies. I mean, it'll cover the marine frequencies and so forth, but it won't transmit on them unless the radio's been modified. Same with this. They can be modified.
And to add on to that, you do want to be careful that, as I mentioned, that this is not a commercial grade radio. And so to the letter of the law, taking one of these radios and modifying it and then using it on a frequency that you may be allowed to transmit on, unless it's a emergency or life and limb situation to the letter of the law, you probably are not okay. But if you're in a life or limb situation and you have a modified radio with you and communicating is going to save someone's life, go ahead, whatever means you have available to you. Did that help? Yeah.
I'm poisoned by the internet and how there's like trolls everywhere doing everything. How is there safeguarding to this? For example, if there's somebody out there being nefarious on different frequencies, how is that policed, or how is that?
So the question is, as we're all familiar with internet trolls, and what's the policing or safeguard from that type of behavior on amateur radio? This is a big reason why there's still a test. It's, you know, and Joe mentioned how there's a lot of questions that you'll never use it in your actual use of the radio. It's basically a hoop you got to jump through to show I'm entering this community in good faith. And so that weeds out a whole, that's why citizen band radio is just kind of, that's why that's messy, and this is not. And so there are very clear rules by the FCC. Amateur radio operators are actually really good at policing their own, monitoring their own. And because we don't want our privileges to be taken away, we don't want the different bands that we have to be, we don't want the FCC to get angry with amateur radio operators. And so amateur radio operators actually monitor our own community and say, that's not okay. And we've got this nice list of rules of like, here's what's okay, here's what's not. And so it's very clear, if somebody's breaking those rules. And so people like us will be like, hey, you're transmitting the wrong stuff. And I've never had to do that myself, but the amateur radio community polices their own and keeps us accountable to the standards.
I'd like to add to that. So there's some bad actors out there, and on the internet, you can go to Amazon, and you can buy a radio that's a little radio like this, and it costs $25 to $30. It's called the Bofang, and it's a cheap Chinese radio. And that's the radio communication that was used in the January 6th uprising. They didn't have ham radio licenses, but the ham radio operators were policing because some of them were using a repeater, just like ours in the Washington, D.C. The operator of that repeater turned the repeater off. Okay? So yeah, we police, but we can't cover everybody. So.
You guys mentioned the FCC is monitoring and has fined people for foul language, correct?
So the question is, does the FCC monitor stuff? Yes, they do. And a part of the self-policing is we could report a violation to the FCC that then they could investigate.
Joe, I can't make the Saturday class, are you going to be doing another one?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, and
So the question was, is there going to be, if people can't make the Saturday class, will there be another one? And you think so?
I think so. Well, let's get the
Tim,
answer.
if you're interested, there's a sign-up sheet in the back, and just make a note that, you know, your name, your email, and that you're interested in a future class. So, because I will forget. Okay, all right. So I think that might be it. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. That was really great. And thanks everybody for watching. We had a good audience in the live stream, so that's terrific.
The library that,
Yes, it is. Lahela found it, and yes, it is there. So,
Oh, it's called, sorry, it's not called the John Francis story, it's called Bringing John's Home.
the book that Joe mentioned earlier, the title of it was Bringing John Home, The Wilderness Search for John Francis. So, you can find it at the Haley Public Library. So, thanks everybody. Good night.
Thank you.